Get on the ground right now. Keep your hands where I can see them. Don't you move an inch or I swear I'll break your damn arm. Officer Daniel Harper's roar shattered the humid August night outside the Quick Trip gas station in Decatur, Georgia. The kind of command that froze everyone within earshot, even those just stopping for gas or snacks. His voice cut through the low hum of engines and distant music like a blade, loud, sharp, and dripping with authority. "Do exactly what I tell you or you'll regret it," he barked again, his tone escalating with every word, leaving no room for question, no chance to breathe, no time to think. "Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from, drop your city in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and hit like for more stories like this. Now, let's get into it." Judge Nathaniel Carter never imagined he'd hear words like that directed at him. Not here, not in Atlanta, not after everything he had built over the past 20 years. At 47 years old, he had earned respect as one of DeKalb County's most principled Superior Court judges, a man known for protecting constitutional rights and fighting for fairness in every case before him. And yet here he was, standing next to his black Lexus under the harsh fluorescent lights, exhausted from an endless day at Emory University Hospital where his wife Alicia was recovering from surgery, and suddenly treated like a dangerous criminal. He had stopped at the Quick Trip for nothing more than a bottle of water before heading home to Buckhead, but within seconds, the night had spiraled beyond control. Harper and his younger partner, Officer Michael Vaughn, had stormed across the parking lot like predators closing in, their boots pounding against the pavement, hands hovering over their holsters, their eyes locked on him as if he had already been convicted of something he didn't even know existed. "Step away from the car! Hands up! Now!" Harper barked again, voice sharp enough to draw stares from across the station. Nathaniel slowly raised his hands, trying to project calm even as his pulse raced. "Officers, there must be some mistake," he said, his voice steady but firm, each word measured like the arguments he'd made 1,000 times in court. "I'm Judge Nathaniel Carter, DeKalb County Superior Court. My ID is right here in my wallet. Please, check it." Harper scoffed loudly, not even glancing at the wallet Nathaniel was pointing to. "Yeah. Sure you are," he sneered, his lips curling into a smirk that sent a cold rush down Nathaniel's spine. "We've got an armed robbery suspect on the loose. Black male, medium build, dark jacket, black sedan. And look at you. You fit it perfectly." Nathaniel froze for a moment, blinking, confused and stunned at the absurdity. He wasn't even wearing a jacket. He was still dressed in his gray suit from a long day in court, his tie loosened, his judge's ID badge clipped neatly inside his pocket. But before he could respond, Harper lunged forward, shoving him hard against the hood of his car. The metal was cold, unforgiving against his chest as Vaughn stepped in, grabbing Nathaniel's left arm and yanking it behind his back with brutal force. Pain shot through his shoulder instantly, but Nathaniel gritted his teeth and kept his voice even. "Sir, please," he said calmly, even as his jaw tightened. "My judicial ID is right there. Check my wallet. It'll explain everything." Vaughn hesitated, just for a moment, his grip loosening slightly as doubt flickered across his face. But Harper snapped. "Don't listen to him! Cuff him now!" The sharp click of steel locking around Nathaniel's wrists rang louder than anything else, louder than the traffic, louder than the murmurs building behind him, louder than the pounding in his own ears, by now. A small crowd had gathered near the gas pumps, phones out, recording everything. Among them stood Priya Sharma, the Quick Trip manager, frozen in shock as she whispered into her headset. "That's Judge Carter. Oh my God, that's Judge Carter." Her words didn't matter here. Harper wasn't listening. None of them were. He pressed harder against Nathaniel's back, leaning close enough that Nathaniel could feel his breath when he spat his next words quietly, almost like a promise meant to wound. People like you think you're above the law." Harper muttered coldly, his voice low. "Dangerous. Not tonight." Nathaniel's chest burned, from humiliation, from anger, from disbelief. But he forced himself to breathe, to stay silent, to remember every detail. He thought of Alicia, lying pale and fragile in her hospital bed, of Jasmine and Malik, his teenage children, who looked up to him as their example of dignity and strength. He thought about the courtroom where he had fought for justice for people just like himself. And yet here he was, shoved into the back of a patrol car like a criminal, cameras flashing in his face, strangers whispering. Is that really him? Somewhere behind him, one of the teenagers muttered under his breath, "Man, this ain't right." And another voice responded, "Record all of it." Priya angled her phone, capturing the full scene. Harper's aggressive stance, Vaughn's conflicted expression, Nathaniel's calm dignity despite the steel biting into his wrists. She knew this video would matter later. Nathaniel knew it too, within minutes. That recording hit social media like wildfire. By the time they shoved him into the back seat of the cruiser, the words Judge Carter and racial profiling were already exploding across platforms, hashtags trending faster than the sirens around him. Nathaniel leaned his forehead against the cold window, forcing himself to breathe, to stay in control, to process the chaos unfolding around him. He understood what this meant. This wasn't just another wrongful arrest. This was bigger. This moment, this humiliation, this injustice, this fight was going to change everything, not just for him, but for Atlanta, for his family, and for every person watching who had ever been treated like they didn't belong. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the shock, beneath the anger, a resolve began to take root. Nathaniel Carter was no ordinary man, and this night was far from over. Nathaniel Carter sat in the back of the patrol car, wrists cuffed tightly, cheek pressed against the cold glass as blue and red lights flashed across his face. The sirens silent, but the humiliation deafening. The city blurred outside the window as Harper drove aggressively, knuckles white on the steering wheel, Vaughn in the passenger seat silent, eyes darting nervously toward Nathaniel through the rearview mirror. Nathaniel said nothing. He didn't trust his voice right now. He breathed slowly, deliberately, his years on the bench teaching him that sometimes silence spoke louder than words. But inside, his thoughts burned like fire. He replayed every second, every order barked, every shove, every ounce of disrespect. He thought about the video, Priya's phone recording, the crowd, the whispers. By now, he knew it was everywhere. His children would see it. Alicia might already know, and by morning, half the city would be talking about Judge Nathaniel Carter being arrested like a criminal in a gas station parking lot. As they pulled into the DeKalb County precinct, Harper parked abruptly, yanking the door open with unnecessary force. "Out," he ordered coldly, gripping Nathaniel's arm tighter than necessary as he escorted him inside. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, the tiled floor polished but sticky under Nathaniel's shoes. A few officers paused to stare as they entered, some whispering quietly as if they recognized him, others looking right through him as if he were no one. Harper approached the front desk, slapping paperwork down hard. "Armed robbery suspect. Bringing him in for processing," he said curtly. Nathaniel raised his head slightly, his voice calm but firm. "I told you already. I am Judge Nathaniel Carter. My judicial ID is in my wallet. Check it now. And this will end immediately." The desk sergeant, an older man with thinning gray hair and a permanent scowl, barely glanced up from his computer. "We'll sort it out later," he muttered, reaching for an intake form. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent, remembering what Alicia always told him. Control the controllable. Fight when it matters most. Harper handed over his belongings, including Nathaniel's wallet, but made no move to open it. Instead, He shoved Nathaniel toward the booking area where bright lights and loud chatter made everything feel smaller, louder, more suffocating. "Stand here," Harper barked, positioning Nathaniel in front of a camera. "Turn left, now right. Look at me." The shutter clicked. Each flash felt like a blow, erasing years of respect in seconds. Behind him, Vaughn shifted uneasily, his arms crossed, clearly conflicted. Nathaniel noticed it but said nothing. He was gathering details, reading the room like a courtroom, body language, tone, expressions, storing it all for later. As they led him toward fingerprinting, he heard whispers behind him. "That's the judge from Superior Court, right?" One officer murmured to another. "Man, you sure? If that's him, Harper's in deep trouble." The other replied. Nathaniel pretended not to hear, but every word landed hard. Officer Jamal Robinson approached, a young black officer barely in his late 20s, his expression tense but respectful. "Judge Carter?" he whispered softly, careful not to draw Harper's attention. Nathaniel glanced at him, recognizing him instantly from a lecture he'd given last year to new recruits about constitutional rights and community trust. "Yes," Nathaniel said quietly. Robinson's jaw clenched. "Sir, I saw the video. He stopped as Harper barked his name sharply, forcing Robinson to step back. Nathaniel caught the flicker of sympathy in his eyes, though, and it grounded him, reminding him that not everyone here was blind to what was happening. Time dragged as they moved him from one station to the next. Photographs, fingerprints, intake forms. The process designed to strip him down, reduce him to a number. At one point, Harper laughed under his breath, whispering to Vaughn, "Bet the judge ain't used to being on this side of the law." Vaughn didn't respond. He hadn't said a word since they left the quick trip. Nathaniel noticed the tightness in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. But Vaughn kept his eyes forward, silent. Finally, Nathaniel spoke again, voice steady but cutting through the noise like a gavel. "Officers, I am demanding my phone call and immediate access to my attorney. If you continue to deny my identification, you are violating multiple protocols and rights." Harper turned, smirking. "You'll get your call when we're done here. Not before." Nathaniel inhaled deeply, refusing to let his temper win. He thought of Alicia, fragile in her hospital bed, and forced his voice softer. "Call Judge Elena Morales," he said, addressing Robinson this time. "She'll verify who I am." Robinson hesitated, glancing at Harper, then nodded subtly and slipped away toward the hallway. Harper noticed, but didn't chase him, muttering something under his breath about rookies who don't know their place. The minutes stretched like hours until Robinson returned, walking briskly toward the booking desk. "Sergeant," he said firmly, holding up a phone. "I just spoke to Judge Morales. She confirmed this is Judge Nathaniel Carter. We need to stop processing immediately." A hush fell over the room. Even the sergeant looked up this time, his frown deepening as he glanced from Robinson to Nathaniel to Harper. "That true?" he asked Harper slowly. Harper stiffened, his shoulders tight. Suspect matched the description. "Sir," he said defensively, "we followed procedure." Nathaniel turned to face them, still cuffed, his voice calm but carrying authority forged from decades on the bench. "You ignored my ID. You ignored my position. And now the entire city has watched you shove a sitting judge into the back of a cruiser like a criminal. Check your phones if you think I'm exaggerating." Harper's hand twitched toward his pocket instinctively, but the sergeant had already pulled up his own screen. The video was there, front and center, tens of thousands of views, the comments flooding in, the headlines screaming about racial profiling and police misconduct. Silence settled over the room for a long, heavy moment before the sergeant finally cleared his throat. "Uncuff him," he ordered quietly. Harper hesitated, but Vaughn stepped forward first, unlocking the cuffs without a word, his hands trembling slightly. Nathaniel rubbed his wrists slowly, the marks red and raw, but his face remained composed. He glanced at Robinson, giving him the slightest nod of gratitude, then turned to Harper, his voice low, deliberate. "This isn't over," he said softly, just loud enough for Harper to hear. Harper's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Moments later, Robinson guided Nathaniel toward a quiet room at the back of the precinct, offering him privacy to make his call. Nathaniel dialed Elena Morales, explaining briefly what happened. His words clipped and precise, his tone steady despite the storm inside him. "I'll handle it," Elena said firmly on the other end. "Get home to Alicia. We'll deal with this in court." As Nathaniel hung up, he finally exhaled, the tension leaving his body in slow waves. But deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. This was the beginning. By the time he walked out of the precinct, the video had crossed 500,000 views. National reporters were already calling his office, and protesters had begun gathering outside demanding accountability. Nathaniel glanced up at the night sky, his reflection faint in the glass doors behind him, and thought about the weight of what lay ahead. Tomorrow, he would return to his courtroom, and tomorrow, he would face the very same officers who put him in cuffs. Nathaniel Carter drove home in silence, the soft hum of the engine the only sound breaking through the weight of his thoughts. His hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than he realized, his knuckles pale against the black leather. The city lights blurred as he passed familiar streets, but he barely noticed them. His mind replayed every second of the arrest, the feel of cold steel cuffs on his wrists, Harper's smug grin, Vaughn's silence, and the sea of raised phones capturing his humiliation. By now, he knew the video had gone viral. He could feel it in the stares from passing drivers, the buzz of notifications on his phone, the emails piling up from colleagues and journalists. As he turned into his driveway in Buckhead, he hesitated for a moment, exhaling slowly before shutting off the engine. He could already see the soft lights glowing through the windows of his house, his sanctuary. But tonight it felt different, heavier somehow, as if even the walls carried the weight of what had happened. Inside, Jasmine and Malik, his teenage children, were waiting in the living room, their faces pale with worry. Jasmine, 16 and fiery like her mother, stood as soon as he walked through the door, her voice trembling but sharp. "Dad, I saw the video," she said, holding up her phone, her brown eyes wide with anger and fear. "They shoved you like you were nothing. How could they do that to you?" Malik, 14, quieter but no less shaken, sat on the couch, his fists clenched at his sides. "I wanted to go down there." "Dad," he said softly, his voice breaking slightly. "I wanted to tell them who you are. Make them stop." Nathaniel dropped his keys on the table, his shoulders heavy as he walked toward them. He didn't speak right away, instead. He pulled both of them close, wrapping his arms around them, grounding himself in the steady rhythm of their breathing. "I'm okay," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "I'm here. I'm home." But Jasmine pulled back, frustration flashing across her face. Being okay isn't enough. "Dad, this video is everywhere. Everyone is talking about it. Kids at school are texting me. Reporters are calling. People want to know how this could happen to you of all people." Nathaniel nodded slowly, meeting her gaze, knowing there were no easy answers. "It happened because I'm a black man in America," he said quietly, the words heavy but deliberate. "My title didn't matter to them. My years of service didn't matter. All they saw was what they wanted to see." The silence that followed was sharp, broken only by Malik whispering, "It's not fair." Nathaniel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. gripping it gently. "No, it isn't," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But fairness isn't guaranteed. Malik, that's why we fight for it." Before he could say more, the sound of his phone buzzing on the table pulled him back. It was Alicia, calling from her hospital room. He answered quickly, forcing steadiness into his voice. "I'm home," he said softly. "I'm okay." But Alicia had already seen the video, her voice calm but laced with quiet fury. "I watched what they did to you," she said, her tone clipped. "You kept your composure. But Nathaniel, this isn't just about you anymore. This is bigger. You can't stay silent." He leaned against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her words settle deep into his chest. "I know," he replied. "I'm thinking about our options." Alicia didn't hesitate. "Don't just think. Act. File a civil rights suit. Go public. Demand accountability. If this can happen to you, it can happen to anyone." Nathaniel glanced at Jasmine and Malik, who were listening intently, their faces tense, waiting for his response. "I'm not rushing this," he said firmly. "This isn't about vengeance. It's about change." Alicia paused for a long moment before replying, her voice softening. "Then make it count. Nathaniel, use your position, your voice. Turn this into something bigger than us." When the call ended, he stood in silence, staring at the muted TV where news anchors were already replaying the video. The headline bold across the screen: "Superior Court Judge Wrongfully Arrested. Viral Outrage Sparks Investigation." Reporters were gathering outside the precinct, protesters holding signs demanding justice. Jasmine clenched her phone, scrolling through comments, her voice rising as she read them aloud. "How does this happen in 2024? If they'll do this to a judge, what chance do the rest of us have?" "Dad, people are angry." Malik stood suddenly, his voice steady now, determination flashing in his young eyes. "Then let's do something," he said. "Let me help. I want to join the Youth Justice Coalition at school. I want to be part of this." Nathaniel looked at him for a long moment, seeing not just his son but the weight of a generation demanding change. "We will," he said finally, nodding slowly, "but we'll do it the right way, one step at a time." Later that night, as the house quieted and the kids retreated to their rooms, Nathaniel sat at the dining table, his laptop open, the glow of the screen reflecting off his tired eyes. He pulled up judicial ethics guidelines, reviewing them carefully, considering every implication, every conflict, every path forward. He knew the next steps weren't simple. Tomorrow, he would preside over a misconduct hearing involving Harper and Vaughn, accused in another case of excessive force against a young man named Malik Thompson. Until tonight, it had been just another case on his docket. But now, everything had changed. He was both victim and judge, carrying a personal stake in the very system he swore to uphold. Could he remain impartial? Could he set aside his own humiliation to deliver justice without bias? He thought of Elena Morales, his trusted colleague, her sharp mind and steady counsel guiding him through tough decisions in the past. He would speak with her in the morning. For now, he needed rest, but sleep wouldn't come easily. He closed his laptop and sat in the quiet, letting the events of the day settle, his mind heavy but focused, his resolve hardening like steel. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every person who had been stopped, questioned, humiliated, and silenced. And he wasn't going to let it end with his arrest. By morning, the headlines would be louder, the protests bigger, the pressure mounting, and when he stepped into his courtroom tomorrow, all eyes would be on him, the man wrongfully arrested, now presiding over the hearing that could expose the very system that tried to break him. The next morning, the DeKalb County Courthouse was buzzing long before the sun had fully risen. Reporters crowding the steps, cameras flashing as protesters gathered outside holding signs that read, "Justice for all and end racial profiling now." Inside, the tension was electric. The quiet murmur of voices carrying a weight that made every sound sharp, deliberate, urgent. Judge Nathaniel Carter walked through the side entrance, his black robe folded neatly over his arm, his expression calm but unreadable. Every step measured as he climbed the marble staircase toward his courtroom. He could feel the shift in the air the moment he entered. The attorneys whispering, journalists scribbling furiously, the gallery packed to capacity, everyone waiting to see what he would do. At the front, seated at the defense table, Officers Daniel Harper and Michael Vaughn sat side by side, both dressed in dark suits instead of their uniforms. But the contrast in their expressions couldn't have been clearer. Harper sat stiff, jaw tight, his eyes cold and unyielding, refusing to look at Nathaniel. Vaughn, on the other hand, looked pale, restless, his hands clasped together on the table, his gaze flicking nervously between the papers in front of him and the floor beneath his feet. Beside them, their union attorney, Richard Baxter, leaned back confidently in his chair, his silver tie glinting under the courtroom lights, his smirk making it clear he intended to fight this hearing like a battlefield. Across from them sat Malik Thompson, the young nursing assistant whose complaint of excessive force had triggered this misconduct hearing. His posture tense, his fingers twisting around the edge of a notepad as if holding on for stability. Nathaniel took his seat on the bench, unfolding his robe and sliding it on slowly, deliberately, his gavel resting lightly in his hand. "Court is now in session," he said, his voice even but firm, carrying across the room with quiet authority. Baxter stood almost immediately, buttoning his jacket and stepping forward. "Your Honor," he began, his tone smooth but edged with challenge. "With all due respect, we request that you recuse yourself from this proceeding, given your incident with my clients last night. There's an obvious conflict of interest here." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery, reporters scribbling furiously as Nathaniel raised a hand for silence. "Mr. Baxter," he said calmly, his gaze steady, "I have reviewed the judicial ethics guidelines thoroughly, and there is no legal requirement for me to recuse myself. The events of last night are unrelated to the matter before this court, and my ability to remain impartial is not in question." Baxter smirked, clearly prepared for that response. "Unrelated?" he said sharply, gesturing toward Harper and Vaughn. "Your Honor, these are the same officers who detained you less than 24 hours ago. You were humiliated in public by my clients. Surely you don't expect the public, or this court, to believe that you can rule fairly." Nathaniel leaned forward slightly, his voice steady but carrying a quiet force that silenced the whispers instantly. "Mr. Baxter, I am not here to rule based on my feelings. I am here to rule based on the facts, the law, and the evidence presented. That is my duty, and I intend to fulfill it." Baxter hesitated, caught off guard by the unshakable authority in Nathaniel's tone. But he recovered quickly, muttering something under his breath before sitting down. Nathaniel turned to the courtroom clerk. "Call the first witness," he said. Malik Thompson rose from his seat slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he walked to the stand. He raised his right hand, took the oath, and settled into the witness chair, his voice soft but steady as he began recounting the night in question. He described leaving work at the hospital, stopping at a convenience store on his way home, and being confronted by Harper and Vaughn in the parking lot. "They told me I matched a suspect's description," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I kept telling them I was just getting off work, that I had my ID and badge with me. But Officer Harper didn't want to hear it. He shoved me against my car, hard enough to bruise my ribs, and when I protested, he tightened the cuffs so badly I lost feeling in my hands. The gallery was silent, every word heavy, vivid, undeniable. Baxter rose for cross-examination, his tone sharp. "Mr. Thompson, you claim my clients used excessive force, yet isn't it true you resisted their instructions?" Malik shook his head firmly, his voice louder now, conviction strengthening his words. "I didn't resist anything. I did exactly what they said. The only thing I did was ask why I was being stopped." Harper shifted in his chair, his jaw clenching tighter, and Nathaniel watched closely, noting every twitch, every flicker of expression. When the body camera footage played, the tension in the courtroom climbed higher. The video showed Harper pushing Malik against the car while Vaughn hesitated in the background, muttering, "We should check his ID," only for Harper to snap back. "Don't waste time. Cuff him." Gasps rippled through the gallery as the footage ended, the silence that followed louder than any argument. Nathaniel sat still for a long moment, his expression unreadable, before turning to Vaughn directly. "Officer Vaughn," he said evenly, "do you confirm this footage accurately reflects what happened?" Vaughn swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing as he shifted under the weight of the room's attention. "Yes, Your Honor," he said quietly. "It's accurate." Harper shot him a sharp glare, but Vaughn kept his gaze fixed on the judge, his voice trembling slightly as he added, I thought we should check his ID." Baxter leaned over quickly, whispering furiously to Harper, whose face had turned crimson with restrained anger. The divide between the two officers was clear now, and Nathaniel noted it carefully. "We will continue," Nathaniel said calmly, moving the hearing forward. But inside, his thoughts churned, each revelation confirming what he had already begun to suspect. This wasn't just about Malik Thompson, and it wasn't just about his own arrest. This was about patterns, practices, and a culture of authority unchecked for too long. Witness after witness took the stand. A nurse from the hospital who had seen Malik minutes before the incident. Priya Sharma, who provided security footage from the Quick Trip parking lot. And finally, Officer Jamal Robinson, whose testimony carried the weight of someone risking everything. Robinson stepped up, his uniform crisp, his voice steady but tinged with quiet determination as he described informal quota stops targeting Black and Latino drivers in specific neighborhoods. "It's not written anywhere," Robinson said carefully, his eyes fixed on Nathaniel's. "But it's understood. More stops, more arrests, better performance reviews, and everyone knows the areas we focus on." A wave of murmurs swept the gallery as Robinson's words sank in. Baxter objected loudly, calling it hearsay, but Nathaniel overruled him, his tone clipped and decisive. "The witness will continue." Robinson glanced briefly at Vaughn, then at Harper, before lowering his voice slightly. "I became a cop to serve, to build trust, but this isn't justice. Your Honor, it's numbers, and people like Mr. Thompson, and you, sir, get caught in it." Nathaniel inhaled slowly, steadying his composure as he let Robinson's words settle over the courtroom like a thunderclap. Looking around the room, he saw faces wide-eyed, jaws tight, journalists scribbling faster than ever, their pens struggling to keep up with the gravity of what was unfolding. As the session drew to a close, Nathaniel's gavel came down lightly, signaling recess, but the weight of the morning lingered in the air like a storm waiting to break. He stood slowly, removing his robe, his mind already racing toward the next steps. Tomorrow would bring more testimony, more evidence, and greater pressure than ever before. For Harper and Vaughn. The cracks in their defense were widening. For Nathaniel, the balance between impartial judge and wronged citizen grew more complicated by the minute, and for the city of Atlanta. What had begun as one arrest in a gas station parking lot was rapidly becoming something far bigger. a reckoning decades in the making. The following morning, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. The tension so thick it felt like the air itself was heavy. Every seat filled, every hallway crowded with reporters, activists, and citizens holding their breath for what was about to unfold. Judge Nathaniel Carter walked in slowly, his black robe flowing behind him, his expression calm but his mind sharp, knowing today would change everything. Yesterday had cracked the surface, but today, he expected the floodgates to open. As he settled onto the bench, he glanced briefly at the defense table where Daniel Harper sat rigid and unyielding, his jaw locked, his knuckles white as his hands gripped the edge of the table. Beside him, Michael Vaughn looked pale and restless, dark circles under his eyes from a sleepless night, his gaze shifting constantly between the floor and the gallery. Their union attorney, Richard Baxter, leaned back in his chair, his silver tie catching the light, his smirk confident but thinner than before. Across the room, Malik Thompson sat with his attorney, shoulders squared but posture tense, his face a mix of determination and quiet fear. At the far end of the gallery, Priya Sharma, the Quick Trip manager whose video sparked the outrage, sat near Officer Jamal Robinson, who was ready to testify again if called. Outside, chants from protesters echoed faintly through the courthouse walls. Justice now, and end profiling. Their voices growing louder by the hour. Nathaniel raised his gavel, tapping it lightly once. "Court is now in session," he announced, his voice steady, carrying authority that demanded attention. Baxter stood immediately, his tone sharp. "Your Honor, before we continue, I must object to the witness list," he began, gesturing toward Officer Vaughn. "It has come to my attention that my client has been pressured into speaking without counsel present." Vaughn's head jerked toward him, eyes widening, but before he could speak, Nathaniel responded calmly. "Mr. Vaughn has his counsel sitting right beside him. Mr. Baxter, he will be sworn in like every other witness. Objection denied." Baxter's jaw tightened as he sat down, leaning close to Harper and whispering furiously. But Vaughn's face told a different story. Fear, guilt, and something else Nathaniel recognized instantly. The quiet resolve of a man ready to unburden himself. When Vaughn took the stand, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. He raised his right hand, swore the oath, and sat down slowly, adjusting the microphone nervously. Nathaniel's voice softened slightly, inviting him to begin. "Officer Vaughn," he said evenly, "describe, in your own words, what you witnessed on the night of Mr. Thompson's arrest." Vaughn hesitated, swallowing hard before finally speaking, his voice low but audible. "Your Honor, what happened that night wasn't just about Mr. Thompson. It's bigger than that." A ripple of murmurs swept through the gallery, but Nathaniel raised his hand for silence, his gaze fixed on Vaughn. "Go on," he said calmly. Vaughn took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he gripped the edges of the witness stand. "We were told, unofficially." He began carefully, glancing at Harper, whose glare was like daggers, to increase stops in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods. They called them proactive sweeps, but everyone knew what it meant. Meet your numbers, or you'd pay for it on your evaluations. Baxter shot to his feet instantly. "Objection!" he thundered. "Speculation, hearsay, irrelevant to the case." Nathaniel's gavel came down once, sharp and deliberate. "Overruled. The witness will continue." Vaughn's voice grew steadier as he went on, almost as if speaking the truth gave him strength. "There's pressure from the top," he said firmly. "Quota stops, arrest numbers. We were told to focus on specific areas, places where people wouldn't fight back, where complaints wouldn't stick. If you brought in numbers, you got better shifts, better assignments. If you didn't, you were frozen out." Gasps rippled through the gallery as Vaughn continued, his words pouring out now. "I didn't sign up for this," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I became a cop to serve, to protect people, not to harass them for statistics." Nathaniel studied Vaughn's face carefully, noting the sincerity in his trembling voice, the conflict written plainly across his features. He glanced briefly at Harper, whose expression was stone, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his fury. Vaughn looked down at his hands, hesitating before adding, "And the night of Judge Carter's arrest, I told Harper we should check his ID, but he told me to shut up, said we didn't have time to waste. He wanted the arrest. Your Honor, he wanted the numbers." The room erupted in a wave of shocked murmurs, reporters furiously scribbling as Harper slammed his palm against the defense table, shooting to his feet. "That's a lie!" Harper shouted, his voice booming, his face flushed crimson. Nathaniel's gavel cracked down twice. "Order!" he commanded, his voice like thunder. Harper glared at Vaughn, shaking his head violently. "You're just trying to save yourself!" He spat. "You're weak! Vaughn, you've always been weak!" Vaughn turned to look at him directly, his voice low but steady. "Maybe, but at least I'm telling the truth." The silence that followed was deafening, thick with tension as Harper sat down slowly, his fists clenched, his chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. Nathaniel allowed the quiet to settle before calling the next witness. "Officer Robinson," he said, his tone measured. "You may approach." Jamal Robinson stood, his uniform crisp, his movements controlled but deliberate as he made his way to the stand. After taking the oath, he spoke clearly, his words carrying the weight of someone who had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his mind. "Your Honor," he began, his deep voice steady. "I joined this department to serve my community, but what I've seen over the last 3 years is troubling." He paused, glancing around the courtroom, his gaze lingering on Harper briefly before turning back to Nathaniel. "We've been trained, unofficially, to profile, not written in any manual, but taught through ride-alongs, briefings, conversations. We're told which neighborhoods to patrol, who to stop, and even what language to use to justify it. It's not about safety, sir. It's about numbers." A collective gasp swept through the gallery, louder this time, reporters leaning forward as if they might miss a single word. Robinson continued, his voice rising slightly with conviction. "This isn't one incident. This is the culture. I've watched officers push boundaries because they know complaints won't stick. I've seen records lost when someone high up wanted cases buried. And I've heard captains talk about making examples out of people to keep communities in line." Baxter leapt to his feet again, shouting another objection, but Nathaniel's gavel came down hard. "Overruled," he said sharply, his patience thinning. "The witness will finish." Robinson took a deep breath, his voice softer now but laced with quiet anger. "Your Honor, I respect this badge, but I can't be part of this anymore. I came forward because I saw what happened to Mr. Thompson. I saw what happened to you. And I know, if nothing changes, it's going to happen again." The silence in the courtroom stretched long and heavy, broken only by the distant chants of protesters outside growing louder with every passing minute. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly against the bench, his mind racing as he processed every word, every revelation, every implication. This was bigger than Harper and Vaughn, bigger than Malik Thompson's case, bigger than his own arrest. This was about a system built on numbers, pressure, and fear. And now the cracks were exposed for the world to see. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, heavier than the robe on his shoulders, knowing that the decisions he made in the coming days would shape more than just the outcome of this hearing. They would shape the future of justice in DeKalb County. He looked out across the crowded room, at Harper's simmering rage, Vaughn's quiet guilt, Robinson's brave defiance, Malik's hopeful resolve, and the gallery's tense anticipation. And he knew this wasn't the climax. It was only the beginning of the reckoning. The courtroom was silent, thick with anticipation. As Judge Nathaniel Carter returned to the bench the following morning, his black robe flowing behind him like a shadow of authority, the weight of everything revealed in the last 2 days pressing heavily on his shoulders. Outside, chants from hundreds of protesters filled the air, their voices echoing faintly through the courthouse walls, demanding justice, accountability, and change. Reporters crowded the gallery, cameras flashing, pens poised. Knowing this ruling would define more than a single case. It would define a city struggling to reconcile its promises of equality with the painful reality exposed inside these walls. Nathaniel took his seat slowly, his face calm and composed, though beneath the surface his thoughts churned like a storm. He glanced across the courtroom, his gaze sweeping over every face. Malik Thompson sitting near his attorney, his young shoulders squared with quiet resolve, Priya Sharma clutching her phone tightly, her recording of that night still rippling through social media like wildfire, Officer Jamal Robinson seated in uniform, head held high after risking everything to testify against his own department. Vaughn leaning forward at the defense table, pale but steady, his guilt evident yet tempered by the relief of finally speaking the truth. And Harper, his jaw locked, fists clenched, radiating defiance even now. His stare fixed firmly ahead as though refusing to acknowledge the walls closing in around him. Nathaniel's eyes met Harper's briefly, then shifted to the crowd, his gavel tapping lightly once. This court has considered the testimony, the evidence, and the gravity of the circumstances, he began, his voice even but resonant, each word measured with precision. This is not merely a matter of excessive force. This is a matter of trust. Trust between the people and the institutions sworn to serve them. And when that trust is broken, the consequences reach far beyond a single arrest, a single hearing, or even a single courtroom. He paused, letting his words settle over the room like a weight before continuing. Officers Daniel Harper and Michael Vaughn, he said, his gaze steady on them. This court finds that your actions on the night in question violated both departmental policy and constitutional protections. For your conduct, you are hereby suspended without pay for a period of 6 months, effective immediately. Harper's face flushed red instantly, his jaw tightening as Baxter leaned close, whispering furiously in his ear. But Nathaniel raised a hand, silencing them before they could speak. Furthermore, he continued, his voice rising slightly, carrying to the farthest corners of the room, this ruling goes beyond individual accountability. It demands systemic reform. Murmurs erupted through the gallery, reporters scribbling faster, cameras clicking wildly, but Nathaniel's voice cut cleanly through the chaos. Effective within 30 days, he said firmly. The DeKalb County Police Department will implement the following measures. Mandatory body-worn cameras for all patrol officers, with footage automatically reviewed by an independent civilian oversight board. The creation of a community accountability council composed of residents, advocates, and legal experts to evaluate patterns of misconduct, and a comprehensive review of all arrests conducted in the past 5 years where claims of racial profiling have been raised. The room exploded with sound, gasps, whispers, muffled exclamations, and for a moment Nathaniel allowed it, knowing the magnitude of what he'd just announced. He glanced briefly at Commissioner David Hargrove, seated near the back, his expression pale and tense, the weight of the department's failures crashing visibly over him. Nathaniel's gaze shifted back to the bench, his voice steady but softer now, deliberate and personal. I want to be clear, he said slowly, scanning the faces before him. This ruling is not about vengeance. It is about restoration, restoring trust, restoring dignity, and restoring balance between authority and the community it serves. He drew a deep breath, pausing as silence settled again. When I was arrested, he continued, his tone tightening slightly. I was treated not as a judge, not even as a man, but as a suspect who fit someone's description. That humiliation was real. But this case is not about me. It's about every person who has ever been profiled, silenced, or dismissed without being heard. It's about ensuring that what happened to Mr. Thompson, and yes, what happened to me, never happens again. A soft murmur rippled through the gallery, Jasmine and Malik watching from the front row beside Alicia, who had insisted on leaving the hospital to be present, her hand resting over her heart, her eyes glassy with restrained emotion. Harper shifted in his chair, leaning forward sharply as if to protest, but Vaughn placed a hand on his arm subtly, stopping him. The gesture didn't go unnoticed, and for a brief moment, Nathaniel saw in Vaughn's weary expression the flicker of something rare, remorse mixed with resolve, a man ready to make amends. "Officer Vaughn," Nathaniel said suddenly, addressing him directly, "your cooperation with this court is noted. If you choose, you may petition for reassignment following your suspension and enrollment in community trust training. Your actions moving forward will define your future." Vaughn nodded slowly, visibly fighting back emotion, while Harper scoffed loudly, shaking his head in disbelief. Nathaniel let the reaction pass without comment, turning his attention back to the gallery. "This court hereby orders the DeKalb County District Attorney's Office to open a formal review into all complaints of misconduct within the department over the last decade," he declared, his tone resolute. "And to the people of this community, I make this promise. This courtroom will remain open to your voices, your stories, and your pursuit of justice. Change begins here, but it does not end here." The sound of pens scratching paper filled the quiet, reporters typing furiously to capture every word as the gravity of his ruling sank deeper into the collective conscience of the room. Outside, the crowd roared louder, chants shaking the walls, their energy rising like a tide fed by hope and anger in equal measure. Nathaniel rested his gavel gently on the bench, his expression softening slightly as he looked once more toward Malik Thompson, whose hands trembled as he exhaled shakily, relief and vindication mingling in his quiet nod. "Mr. Thompson," Nathaniel said gently, "this court recognizes your courage in coming forward. Know that your voice has helped shape change." Malik's eyes shone with restrained tears as he whispered a quiet, "Thank you," audible even in the silence. Nathaniel straightened, his shoulders squared, his voice deepening as he concluded. "Justice," he said slowly, "is not a moment. It is a process. And today, that process has begun." He lifted his gavel high, then brought it down with a sharp, resounding crack that echoed through the courtroom like thunder, signaling not just the close of the hearing but the opening of a new chapter for the city of Atlanta. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke, as the weight of his words settled into the bones of everyone present. Then the gallery erupted, reporters rushing for exits, activists embracing, community leaders whispering urgently about next steps. But Nathaniel remained seated, still, calm, composed, knowing the hardest work was yet to come. Beyond the walls of the courthouse, a movement was already building, fueled by outrage, hope, and the promise of accountability. And for the first time since that night at the Quick Trip, Nathaniel felt the tide begin to shift, not just for himself, but for everyone watching, everyone waiting, everyone demanding to be seen. 6 months later, the city of Atlanta felt different, as if a quiet current of change was running beneath its streets, reshaping old systems, rewriting old rules, and rebuilding broken trust, one decision at a time, outside the DeKalb County Courthouse, where months earlier protesters had shouted for justice and accountability. A new kind of gathering had formed. Community leaders, officers, activists, and residents stood together under the warm spring sun, exchanging ideas instead of accusations, conversations replacing chants. Judge Nathaniel Carter stood at the center of it all, his black robe replaced by a simple gray suit, his posture relaxed but resolute, his eyes scanning the faces of the crowd, seeing something he hadn't seen in years, hope mixed with determination. Since the day of his ruling, reforms had rolled out one after another. Every patrol officer now wore a body-worn camera, and the footage was automatically uploaded to a secure system reviewed weekly by an independent civilian oversight board, the newly formed Community Accountability Council, made up of local residents, legal experts, and social advocates, had already overturned dozens of wrongful citations and launched investigations into misconduct that had long been buried. Monthly forums were held at the Decatur Community Center, where officers and citizens sat side by side in open dialogue, confronting painful truths and finding common ground. The statistics told their own story. Discretionary stops had dropped by 45%. Citizen complaints had fallen sharply, and surveys showed trust in law enforcement rising for the first time in nearly a decade. For Nathaniel, the numbers mattered, but what mattered more were the faces. Neighbors who no longer crossed the street to avoid patrol cars. Teenagers who walked home without fear of being profiled. Families who finally felt heard. Near the courthouse steps, Officer Jamal Robinson stood smiling as he helped a group of high school students set up a booth for a new mentorship program pairing teens with officers committed to reform. Robinson had been promoted to lead the department's Community Relations Division, his courage during the hearing turning him into a symbol of integrity both inside and outside the force. Michael Vaughn had chosen a quieter path, completing his suspension and enrolling in mandatory training on racial bias and de-escalation. Today, he worked in a pilot program designed to rebuild trust in communities most affected by past profiling, mentoring young recruits about accountability and the weight of the badge they carried. Watching him speak softly with a group of new cadets, Nathaniel could see the change in his eyes. Not absolution, but a willingness to take responsibility, to do better than before. Daniel Harper, however, had taken a different road. After his suspension, he returned to duty but found himself under constant review. Every stop, every interaction scrutinized by supervisors and the civilian board. His defiance had not disappeared, but the system he once operated in without fear of consequence was no longer the same. At first, he resisted every reform, filing grievances, challenging protocols, even clashing openly with Robinson during departmental briefings. But over time, the resistance gave way to something unexpected: reflection. He began attending community dialogues reluctantly, sitting in the back with arms crossed, but listening. A month ago, he'd approached Malik Thompson quietly after one of the sessions, offering a handshake without words. Malik had taken it, hesitantly, but it was a start. Malik himself had changed too, inspired by the case and his role in sparking systemic reform. He had enrolled in criminal justice courses at Georgia State University, determined to become an advocate for fair policing and legal equity. If they're going to change the rules, he told Nathaniel during one of their meetings, I want to make sure I'm there to hold them to it. Nathaniel smiled at the memory, proud of Malik's resolve and reminded of the responsibility he carried not just as a judge, but as a symbol of what justice could look like when it was defended relentlessly. Inside the courthouse, Alicia stood waiting for him near the entrance, her recovery complete, her presence a quiet reminder of the personal strength behind his public fight. Jasmine and Malik, their children, had embraced activism too. joining youth coalitions advocating for better school policies and fairer treatment by law enforcement. Jasmine had even helped organize a local youth summit where teens and officers spent an entire weekend working through real scenarios together. The kind of program that would have seemed impossible before the Quick Trip incident. As Nathaniel greeted a group of reporters gathered nearby, he chose his words carefully, knowing they would carry beyond the city. Reform, he said slowly, his deep voice steady. Isn't an announcement. It's not a headline. It's a commitment, a daily choice to do better than yesterday, and a promise that justice serves everyone equally, without exception. The microphones captured every word. But Nathaniel wasn't speaking to cameras. He was speaking to the people listening, the ones who had marched, testified, spoken up, and demanded change. He thought of Priya Sharma, standing nearby with her arms crossed, her phone tucked into her pocket. The same phone that had captured the video that started everything. Priya had been honored at a local civic ceremony weeks earlier, recognized for her courage in choosing transparency over silence. Her quiet smile when she caught Nathaniel's eye spoke louder than any words. Later that afternoon, Nathaniel walked across the courthouse plaza to the Decatur Community Center, where a forum was underway. Inside, rows of folding chairs were filled with residents, activists, and officers, all engaged in real, difficult conversations. At the front, Robinson moderated a panel alongside Vaughn and Malik Thompson, each sharing different perspectives on accountability, rebuilding trust, and the human cost of systemic failure. Harper sat in the back again, silent but attentive, his arms no longer crossed quite so tightly, his expression softer than before. Nathaniel took a seat near the side, listening quietly as people spoke their truths without fear of dismissal or retaliation. A single mother described being stopped 5 times in 6 months before the reforms and how, since the changes. She finally felt safe driving her children to school. A retired officer admitted publicly for the first time that he regretted participating in profiling practices years ago. And a group of local teens spoke passionately about how trust wasn't rebuilt through policies alone, but through relationships, respect, and empathy. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly, absorbing every word, feeling the power of voices once silenced filling the room like a tide rising steadily. When the forum concluded, Robinson spotted Nathaniel and walked over, smiling broadly. "You see this? Judge," he said, gesturing toward the crowd slowly dispersing. This is what change looks like." Nathaniel nodded, his gaze sweeping across the faces leaving the center. Neighbors and officers shaking hands, exchanging phone numbers, making plans for next time. "It's a start," he said quietly, "but it has to last beyond today." As the sun dipped low in the sky, casting golden light through the tall windows of the community center, Nathaniel stepped outside and paused on the plaza, taking in the sounds of laughter, conversation, and quiet hope. He thought about where he had been 6 months ago, shoved against his car, handcuffed in front of strangers, stripped of dignity by men who saw only a profile, not a person, and now, standing here. He felt the weight of that night not as pain, but as purpose. Change wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy, but it was real, built on courage, sacrifice, and a collective refusal to stay silent. Nathaniel glanced at the Quick Trip down the street where it had all started. Watching as a patrol car pulled in slowly, 2 officers stepped out, greeting a group of teenagers by name, shaking hands, smiling, no shouts, no suspicion, no raised voices, just recognition, respect, and humanity. Nathaniel smiled faintly, the corners of his lips curving as he turned back toward the courthouse, the city skyline glowing under the evening sun. For the first time in a long time, He believed something he had always told others but had struggled to feel himself. Justice was possible. And as he walked forward, his steps steady and sure, he carried with him the reminder of that night, the promise born from pain, and the unshakable belief that change, when demanded and defended, can ripple far beyond a single courtroom, transforming not just policies but people, not just systems but souls. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. See you in the next story.